Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast. My name is Jacob Paveo, and I come to you from the Great White North each and every Wednesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Fresh for download. You could listen to this anywhere around the world on your favorite platform. Please, 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 please thank yourself for checking this out. Thank you all so much for the continued support. If you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button. You can reach out to me using the contact page over at the website, laughtolearnpodcast.com. Let's just get into it, because what's the point in lingering? You know how to reach me, you know how to subscribe, you know how to leave reviews. It's not your first rodeo. If it's your first time here, welcome. Thank you for checking out the show. But I hate long introductions, so let's start talking. This week, as I jump into the show super fast, I have a lot to talk about. What a slow news week. The first time, I said this a few weeks into, after Trump left office, there was a week where it was literally, there's nothing really to talk about. You know, as a podcast, you try to talk about things that people want to listen to, that drive downloads, right? Let's be honest. And, you know, it's one of those things that, it's cyclical. So I'm looking at my past episodes by popularity right now, and the last one that did really well was the Orange Shirt Day, talking about the the indigenous population and indigenous struggles. And now I'm kind of in a position where there's been a few weeks of nothing really big in the news, and it feels like this week is the most dead of them all. I mean, really. So we're going to talk about China this week, because if you've followed the podcast for a while, you know it's one of my favorite things to discuss. I think it's one of the most important things to discuss, because they are a major player in the world. And we're going to talk about the Chinese approach to carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. But I just want to make a general statement that there is nothing of interest going on in the world right now, and it makes for this weird, bittersweet feeling within me, because in my personal life, you know what I mean, day to day, there's no worries in the world, in the sense that, you know, we're not talking about major global conflict. You know, we're not worrying about some sort of impending doom or some crazy big election that we don't really know what the results and the fallouts are going to be. You know, we're preparing, because in Ontario here, there is an election upcoming in the early part of next year, but that's a little ways off. There's no real need to discuss it yet. So we're kind of left in this limbo where, in my personal life, day to day, it's all good. And then I have to sit down and last night, I always write out the podcast the day before recording it, or at least I don't write it out. I don't write a script. I used to, but I don't do that anymore. But I write bullet points and whatnot, and literally last night I left a blank page, and I was like, that's future Jacob's problem, because I have no idea what to discuss. So, as usual, I go to the bin of things I really, really know about and I enjoy speaking on. So, right now, we are on the tail end of the G20 summit, which was prefaced by another smaller climate action summit. The climate action summit, I believe, happened in Greece, if I'm not wrong about that. It might have been in Rome, but I have a feel it was that area. Okay, Southern Europe, it's all the same. That's a joke. And then later on, about a week later, we started the G20 summit, which is happening in Scotland. And now the big story coming out of the G20 is that Xi Jinping, I need to learn how to pronounce today, of course, the dictator of China. He runs the Communist Party of China, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. And he didn't show up. He didn't go to the G20. Very unusual, especially for a country like China, because, both China and Russia are kind of like the global opposition to most of the world. And, they both benefit a lot by the leader of the country showing up to these summits. Iran is also a country I would loop in. I would consider those three countries. Because similar to when we discussed North Korea and Kim Jong-un sitting down with President Donald Trump a few years ago, and how it made North Korea a major player in the world. Even though they've had nuclear technology for a while, it's not very capable, but they have it. It makes them a player when they have a seat beside someone like the President of the United States. And so the G20 is an opportunity for countries like China, which, China is the wealthiest country in the world. Like, the U.S. might be, because of reserves and because of how long they've been doing it, but China definitely they bring in more money than any other country in the world. There's no question about it. And obviously we all know why they're able to do that. They have over 1 billion people. Remember, the U.S. have 300 million. China has like 1.8 billion, right? That is literally 6 times the population of the U.S. They better be making more money. But on top of that, they also charge like nothing for labor, and they export things basically for free. That just reminded me, I placed an order for our merchandise. I should have said this off the top. I did take a few notes, and this is one thing I made, but I'm not looking at my notes, so that's why I missed it. But there is one item in our shop that is made in China. I just found out about it because I've ordered them before. I've ordered everything off the store just to make sure that, it's good, high quality. But I needed a new t-shirt. So I needed a new Laugh to Learn t-shirt. And you can check all this out over at laughtolearnpodcast.com/store. So when I place an order, I have to order in threes. It's like, whatever, a background thing for my account. So I have to buy 3 items to get my order, whatever. It's a whole thing. But I also wanted to test it out because I haven't ordered t-shirts, stickers, and mugs from the Canadian distribution center. So they actually print it now in Canada. So I got my t-shirt and I've got my mug. The t-shirt came in 3 days. So if you live in Canada, and especially in Ontario, Quebec even, you can probably have your merchandise in 3 days if you order it. So get on there, makes a great Christmas gift. But I want to make everyone aware, and I'm going to put it on the website, the mug is made in China. I didn't realize it. I've ordered it before, and I just didn't, I didn't think about it. Because it doesn't say made in China through my distributor. But when it comes, there's definitely a made in China sticker on the bottom. So all of my clothing, the cotton is picked in South America. It is woven, I guess is the term, into shirts in Honduras. And it's exported through Mexico to the United States, where it is either printed in Delaware or further moved to Canada, where it is printed with our logos in Mississauga, Ontario. So everything happens in democratic nations. It does move through Mexico, but they're technically democratic. But nothing, it doesn't stop in Mexico. So the one thing is the mug. And the stickers, I'm waiting to see. I haven't got them yet. So I don't know what's going down with the sticker, but I bought it for my snowboard helmet because I'm, might as well. Shameless self-promo. But anyways, just so everyone knows as a side note, if you order the mug, it is made in China. I've been looking into it. I don't know if I can change it, but I really like the mug, So I'm just going to make everyone blatantly aware. the ceramic is made in China. Either way, back to the topic on hand, which is Xi Jinping, the dictator of China, not showing up to the G20 summit. And I will also make it very clear, I do not refer to him as a president. I will not, because he is certainly not an elected official. Not by any stretch of the definition elected. So him not showing up is a weird sign because of the relevance it gives a nation to show up at the G20. You get to, show pictures to your citizens of yourself sitting in the room with everyone, all the movers and shakers, and it really makes you relevant. I think what this shows is that China is properly self-aware, I'll add, that they are a major player in the world and they are not worried about convincing anyone else that they are. And that's why I mentioned China, Iran, and Russia in the same group here. I really want to make it clear that for opposition countries such as those three, it really, really makes them more relevant than they probably are. Like, Russia is one of the most irrelevant countries in the world. They really are. Iran is even more irrelevant. I mean, Iran has more oil reserves, so they control more power in that area. Even though they're financially less relevant than Russia may be, it's really, really difficult for them to be taken seriously if not photographed in these rooms. And that's why Russia shows up to all of these meetings literally always. They do, Putin does not miss a meeting. Iran, the leaders, do not miss a meeting. Because if they do, remember how big of a deal it was when the G8 became the G7 because they removed Russia from it when Russia invaded Crimea. Literally, it is one of the biggest things that Russia still talks about. They've brought it up at the United Nations, and they've brought it up at the G20. They are adamant that they want back into that G8 because of how relevant it makes them as a country. China willingly not sending their leader to the G20 is a means of saying, we don't care anymore, we don't need this. So it's a big change in global politics. Now, it's been spun in the West because, of course, as I mentioned, there was a climate summit before the G20 and then following into the G20 where climate action is the number one thing discussed. So in the West, we're seeing it spun that Xi Jinping is not here because he's not ready to address the climate. And it is in part true because so far internally China has set goals to reach their maximum output of carbon emissions by 2030, right? Whereas pretty much the rest of the world is on board with no longer increasing carbon output starting this year. I think 2025 is the year that a lot of countries are using as the last date for increasing carbon output in their country, whereas China is 5 years beyond that. And they are also already responsible for 30% of the output of the world's carbon emissions. It's important to note that as the rest of the world cuts carbon output, the percentage of output that China makes is going to increase, so much so that they may be responsible for between 40 and 50% of the global carbon footprint every year by 2030 when they start to ramp down their carbon emissions. All that said, it is important to note that China has 1.8 billion people and they do have a plan to cut emissions. Now, I am not one. I went on a 5-minute apology because I sell a mug that is produced in China, okay? I am far from an apologist. But I think it's important to, and I'm far from a supporter as well, right? I've discussed that at length on the podcast. But I think it's important to note what we're seeing in the media, because most people probably don't care about coverage of the G20, but I do. So I find it interesting, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But the way that it's discussed is really odd to me, because I think the story is that China feels they're no longer at a point where they need to send their leader to the G20 unless they really need to drive something home. Because this is a climate discussion, we all know that the plan is to attack China. All these other countries are going to go after China. So they basically said, well, why send the leader just to be, lambasted by these other nations? It's a waste of our time. And we don't need the photos. We don't need that, right? In contrast to Russia, who, if you may recall, after annexing Crimea, after taking over European land, the next year, Putin was at a G20 summit. Literally the next year. So he didn't miss a single year. He stole land from Europe and then knew that he had to go and sit down with European leaders a few months later, because otherwise he wouldn't have been seen in that room. He would have been seen as less than those in the G20. So I think that this is a huge, huge step forward by China that a lot of people are missing the point. Really, that this is now China completely turning their back on the global summit. Now, they sent a collection of about 50 high-ranking, officials and whatnot. It's not like they're not there, but they didn't send their guy when everyone else did, or essentially everyone else did. And, it's one of those really crazy things. I should note that he did show up by video, like he did a video speech, but Barack Obama also gave a video speech, and guess what? He's not a leader anymore. He was just an invited speaker. So it's kind of like putting Xi Jinping on the level of an invited guest as opposed to a guy who actually shows up and is involved in these negotiations. Now, that said, to wrap it back around to the emissions problem, I think we are in a global position where we need to pivot. And so by all the agreements that were reached over this past week at the G20, we are on track to a global increase of 2.4 degrees Celsius. That is the goal, the limit, I should say, of carbon emissions globally, and that is what the prediction sits at. Now, that is extreme. It's a lot, but it is far from the 10 degrees Celsius predictions that were initially given. So it is better off. However, over time, you are going to see significant sea levels still rising. It's pretty crazy. We're seeing lots of coastline cities that have already been wiped off. Islands. There was actually one not too long ago after a hurricane in South America, an island in, I believe it was in part of Ghana or owned by Ghana or whatever, and an entire island where like a few thousand people lived. Hurricane came through, flooded it, and it is never coming back. Like, it's underwater. It's too late. Gone. It's these things don't happen instantly. It's not like suddenly you're under 10 feet of water, right? But I forget the name of this island. I wish I had it in front of me. But essentially, it's like they now have, 2 inches of water over top of everything, and the water's never going away. And you can't live there anymore, even though you're not actually underwater, but you can't live there anymore. And that's sort of what's going to start happening. And we're seeing it in places throughout, Venice, for example, is they've spent over $1 billion on flood barriers and stuff, and the water levels are now over top of those barriers. The tides are too high for the barriers to have any impact, so they're putting in new ones. Like, just crazy stuff happening because of global warming. It's definitely an important issue, and definitely something that needs to be sorted out. What I find most interesting, to pivot away from China, is that right now, the global leader in discussion on climate change is a young girl in Greta Thunberg. Someone who, like, a lot of people respect and listen to. For me, like, it's definitely important to have young voices in a conversation, especially a conversation like this, and these are not the same, but a similar sort of comparison was Malala, who I think really changed the conversation on the rights of girls and women in the Middle East. Seriously, she literally changed the world for a significant number of females, and she made a huge impact. And I think Greta Thunberg is kind of trying to do that same thing, but this is a science conversation, right? Malala was like, hey, I got shot in the face because I tried to go to school, right? You don't need an adult to tell you that, right? It happened to her while she was like 13 or 14 years old or whatever she was, right? It literally happened to her, and it was her telling her story. Greta Thunberg is not the person to lead this conversation forward because adults sitting at home voting are not listening to her. They're just not. They're not going to. They look at her and go, oh, wow, that's, sure. If you already believe in what she's saying, yeah. But she's not going to convince you of anything. And, I haven't been inspired by her. To me, it's kind of like a weird sort of media stunt that's kind of gone on too long. Why are we sitting here watching a young teenage girl talk to us about science when, like, literally there are PhD level individuals who teach this information to other PhD level individuals, and they can break it down for the population at large in a way that everyone can understand with firm fact, and they can also engage in debate, which changes minds. And that's what I want to see, and that's not what I'm seeing, because we got to a weird point where it's no longer acceptable to question climate change, and I'm not questioning climate change, just to be clear, but it's important to allow people to question everything, right? And again, I say this way too often, but it's something I've talked about on the podcast before, where if you create a scenario where something is simply fact and can't be questioned, it then creates two different camps, where one camp, the larger camp, which, sure, believes it to be true, right? The majority of people believe it to be true. But the people who don't believe it to be true will never be convinced because you've made them an enemy of sort, and then they make you an enemy of sort. And that's literally how it happens always. It's like the idea of racism in the United States. There is definitely still racism in the United States, but it has become completely wrong to question the existence of racism in the United States, so much so that if you say, is there still racism on national television, you get lambasted, your career is literally over. You can't ask that question. Well, if you don't allow people to come on TV and ask that question, how are you going to give the answer to people who disagree with you, or not necessarily disagree, but don't understand what's happening? How are they ever going to learn if you never tell them? They're just supposed to know. And this is the whole idea of like, when you're supposed to just know something, you're never going to teach people how to come to that answer. And people then aren't learning, they're just knowing facts. And you're creating a dumber population when you're not having proper scientific discussion on climate change. That's why, philosophy and theology and religious discussion does some of the best numbers online. Some of the most popular debates ever on the internet are God is real against God is not real. And the reason for that is it's one of the only discussions we're allowed to still openly have. And no one gets upset about that conversation. Both sides think it's a good thing to have it. But when one side starts saying, nope, we can't talk about this anymore, it's just fact, it's a proven fact, then the other side says, well, you can't defend yourself anymore. See, they don't want to talk anymore. And then you have these two different groups that never talk, right? There is a point where the conversation should no longer happen. Flat Earth is something that is pretty much at that point. But, I mean, I did a huge podcast on it. It actually did pretty good numbers for, in my first year. It did pretty good. Go check it out if you haven't yet. It's like one of my favorite episodes I've ever done because of just how crazy the theory is. But I just told you what the theory is. So if you don't know the details of it, you can go and listen. And then you can have a conversation with a flat earther and know the points they're going to make ahead of time and have a proper conversation about it to try and convince them. Because otherwise, if you just shut off the other side, then you're never, then the other side only grows. They're going to have kids and they're going to have friends and they're just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And both of you think you're right and no one's talking. And the side that is incorrect, if there's such a thing, which in this case, like with global warming, there's definitely an incorrect opinion, right? There just is. And the side that's incorrect, if they're not allowed to say, hey, I think this isn't real, well, how are you ever supposed to convince them that it is? So that's just an aside for me. That's one thing that I think about in discussion and debate. It's a major reason why I love doing this. I can't wait for I have booked a conversation with an individual who's anti-vax. It's booked. Booked in the sense that we're going to do it. We're working out the logistics of when and where. And I'm so excited for it because I think it's so important because there are none of these voices really being given the ability to discuss their decision. Even on a place like Aaron Rodgers right now is in the news, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, because he said he was immunized because he went to like a naturopath or whatever, but he wasn't. They were like, "Are you vaccinated?" He said, "Yes, I'm immunized." And then he gets COVID, and then everyone finds out, oh, he's actually not even vaccinated. So it's just like whatever, a whole bunch of bullshit. But people are just focusing on did he lie or did he not lie? Like that's what they're talking about. No one's actually asking him like, why did you make that decision? So I'm really excited to have that conversation. That's the sort of thing that I do this for. So I hope you are looking forward to that, first of all. And I hope you're able to share similar feelings because that's kind of what I want to give back to the world is to get people talking, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable, even if it's something that maybe we're not really supposed to have that conversation. Everyone's supposed to go into their corner and pretend the other opinion doesn't exist. I don't live my life like that. So, and I don't think you should either. I don't think anyone should. It's very unhealthy. And it's honestly sad when I see people, whenever I hear a phrase like, how could anyone vote for Donald Trump? When I hear a phrase like that, I feel sad for that person. Because to me, it's a statement of your disconnect with literally half of the American population, like 48 or 49% of the American population, that you have completely disconnected from. That's really sad. Personally, I wouldn't have voted for him, but I make a strong effort to understand the reason why. And that's why I want to have this vaccine discussion, because although I'm fully vaccinated, right, to me there was never a fear, a concern. Like, there just wasn't. I talked about it on the show. Like, why am I getting vaccinated? Like, why not? I don't know. I put some crazy shit in my body before. What's the harm, right? So I'm interested in why people are afraid of it, why there's hesitancy. I want to have those discussions, because even if I don't change his mind, and even if he was to change my mind, he can't get it out of my veins, so I'm not really afraid of that, right? So why are you avoiding the conversation? What are people afraid of? Why are people afraid of understanding a Trump voter? To me, I don't get, just punch the microphone. I don't get willing disconnect. And that's something that I'm hoping to bridge in people. And I hope you feel the same way. Thanks so much for tuning in this week. That was my valiant effort to make something out of literally no news. So thanks for sticking with it to the end. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you come back for more each and every Wednesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, if you have yet to do so, please hit that subscribe button and come back next week and every week thereafter. This is episode 129, by the way. Damn, we've been doing this for a while. I'm really thankful for everyone, for real, for checking it out. Don't forget the merch store. It makes great Christmas gifts if you have a loved one who enjoys the podcast. Everything, I make it as affordable as possible. I make literally $0 on everything. So it's literally as affordable as I can make it for you after my costs of supplying it. So check it out if you are interested. And I'm fairly certain. Yeah, actually, all shipping costs are already included. So the price you see is the price you pay in Canadian dollars. Once again, laughtolearnpodcast.com/store. Follow me over on social media if you'd like. The links are down below. You guys know what you're doing. Don't forget to tell your friends about the show. Word of mouth is the best way to spread it. But of course, you could share a link on social media if you'd like. Tag me in the link, and I'll give you a little shout out. I've really got nothing else to add. Keep washing your hands, keep social distancing, keep wearing those masks if you're in a place where you have to. Keep on laughing, and keep on learning.